It never began with women. It began with a whisper, one so subtle that no one thought to question it. A phrase repeated in classrooms, commercials, and songs until it sank deep into the collective mind. Be strong. Be independent. You don't need a man. At first it sounded noble, empowering, a message about freedom and equality, but hidden inside was a quiet inversion, the kind that doesn't announce itself until decades later. What was sold as liberation slowly morphed into isolation, because that's how ideas spread, softly, like a seed buried beneath good intentions, and just like any seed, it grows. Over time, that seed didn't bloom into freedom, it sprouted division. What began as a movement born from pain slowly started feeding on it. Generation after generation, women were told their struggles had one source: men. That every silence, sacrifice, or missed opportunity could be traced back to male oppression. It became the simplest story to sell: the villain and the victim, both easy to recognize. No complexity, no nuance, just a narrative that felt emotionally satisfying. Then came the amplification. Television shows, films, and media joined the chorus. The strong woman character became the standard: independent, untouchable, liberated, but often portrayed standing above a weak or foolish man. Sitcoms mocked fathers as bumbling, clueless figures. Talk shows ridiculed husbands in the name of humor. But it wasn't humor, it was hypnosis. Because when repetition replaces reason, the mind stops asking questions. Psychologist Robert Cialdini once wrote, "Nothing convinces like repetition." And he was right. What started as entertainment became indoctrination. Soon, entire generations of women grew up seeing men not as partners, but as problems to overcome. Not by choice, but by design. Every headline, every hashtag, every slogan carried the same undertone. Men hold you back. Men are the obstacle. You'll only be free when you outgrow them. When you're told you've been wronged, anger feels like justice, resentment feels like strength, and hate starts to feel like healing. But here's the unseen cost. When you teach someone to despise, you break something inside the student. What was meant to empower began to hollow. The modern woman learned to define herself by opposition, not harmony. She learned to speak louder, but feel less, to replace vulnerability with vigilance, to protect herself from the very thing she secretly longed for: masculine warmth. Carl Jung warned that what you resist persists, and resistance to connection eventually turns into fear of it. That's the tragedy few talk about. The message wasn't about liberation, it was about separation. Because a divided world is easier to control than a united one. As this ideology took root, someone was quietly profiting. While men and women blamed each other, institutions grew stronger. The media found its perfect fuel: conflict. Outrage became a product, and division became the most reliable form of engagement. The more we fought, the more they earned. Every time a marriage broke, a new market was born. Every time trust disappeared, dependency on systems increased, and while both sexes argued over who was right, neither noticed who was winning. But division requires a story, and every story needs a villain. So society picked one: manhood itself. Slowly, masculinity was redefined. Strength became oppression. Leadership became control. Stoicism turned into emotional unavailability. Discipline was labeled rigid. The very traits that built stability were suddenly dangerous. And in that confusion, men began apologizing for their nature. Commercials mocked fatherhood, schools rewarded compliance over courage, and language itself shifted. Provider became patriarch, protector became possessor. Words that once carried honor were turned into warnings. This wasn't balance, it was reversal. A generation raised under that reversal began losing sight of truth. Reaction replaced reflection, emotion replaced understanding. Men started walking on eggshells, careful not to offend. Careful not to lead, careful not to exist too boldly. Women began confusing strength with safety, protection with control, and love with submission. The polarity that once fueled passion turned into paranoia. Masculinity became something to fear, and femininity something to weaponize. But here's the uncomfortable truth most still avoid. This was never about equality. Equality unites, propaganda divides. The system didn't want balance, it wanted distraction. It wanted both sides too busy fighting to notice who was rewriting the rules. While men apologized for existing and women performed strength to hide their exhaustion, an entire culture was rewritten beneath them. Because when both halves of humanity turn against each other, the whole becomes easier to command. And as that seed of division grew, it birthed something even darker, the illusion of rebellion itself. Rebellion once meant something sacred. It was born from the courage to stand against genuine oppression, to demand truth when silence was the easier choice. But somewhere along the way, that spirit was stolen, reshaped, marketed. What began as a fight for freedom turned into a war against connection. It was no longer rebellion against injustice, it became rebellion against intimacy. And few noticed the shift because it felt righteous. It looked empowering, it sounded heroic. But it wasn't liberation anymore. It was performance. The message was clear. Freedom from men is freedom itself. The problem is, that message was never organic. It was engineered. The same corporations and media outlets that once sold dependency began selling defiance. "You don't need a man" became a campaign slogan, a movie plot, a chorus line. Brands learned that outrage sells better than unity. Advertisers discovered that independence, when packaged correctly, could move billions in products, from luxury fashion to dating apps. As the writer Aldous Huxley once said, the propagandist's purpose is to make one set of people forget that certain other sets of people are human. That's exactly what happened. Humanity was stripped away, replaced by ideology. Look at the cultural trail it left behind. The strong female lead in films no longer symbolized grace or resilience, she symbolized vengeance. The music industry glorified revenge anthems and heartbreak as power. Even humor turned cynical. Late-night hosts, viral influencers, and comedians made careers mocking love, family, and fatherhood. The narrative didn't just erase men, it erased partnership. It replaced cooperation with competition, and when you compete with what you need, you lose twice. Because here's what few understand. True rebellion doesn't reject, it redefines. But this modern rebellion wasn't about redefining roles, it was about erasing them. Women were told that nurturing was weakness, that compromise was betrayal, that trust was naive. And slowly, the feminine spirit began to fracture. Instead of healing from the past, it started reenacting it. Anger became identity, and independence turned into armor. There's a reason so many modern women confess to feeling empowered but exhausted. They're carrying a war they were never meant to fight alone. The emotional cost of that inversion runs deep. The same movement that promised liberation now demands constant performance. Every quote about self-love hides a quiet fear of needing anyone. Every viral post about boundaries masks an anxiety about vulnerability. It's not peace, it's self-protection disguised as purpose. Real rebellion would have been balance, not dominance. Harmony, not hierarchy. Because the feminine never loses power by softening. It gains it. As Jung said, where love rules, there is no will to power. But the world doesn't reward love. It rewards outrage. And outrage pays. The moment women began competing with men, companies began counting profits. The system discovered that disconnected individuals are ideal consumers. When families fragment, markets expand. When trust disappears, dependency on comfort and consumption rises. Every broken home creates new demand for therapy, entertainment, validation. The business model is simple. Keep everyone dissatisfied. Convince the woman she's incomplete without independence, and convince the man he's unworthy unless he withdraws. Two isolated people will buy more to fill the same void that unity once solved. You can see the evidence everywhere, in every social feed where connection is traded for performance, in every relationship that feels more like negotiation than love, in every self-made identity built on exhaustion. What we call empowerment has become a never-ending audition. One where women are applauded for their strength but punished for their softness. Men, in turn, are vilified for their nature but mocked for abandoning it. Both sides lose, both sides grieve, and both sides are too proud or too programmed to admit it. This isn't feminism anymore. It's commodified rebellion, a rebellion that forgot what it was rebelling for. It no longer seeks truth, it seeks validation. It doesn't demand justice, it demands attention. Anger became the new currency, and every corporation is cashing in. Because an angry society scrolls more, buys more, obeys more. Love builds homes, outrage sells headlines, and so the cycle continues, a rebellion without purpose, a movement without peace. Every time a woman declares she doesn't need anyone, the system claps in silence. Every time a man stops trying, the machinery of isolation hums a little louder. What started as liberation became a performance, and that performance became profitable. But when rebellion turns into routine, when strength becomes a mask, something vital begins to disappear. You can see it in her posture, in her tone, in her eyes, the fatigue of pretending not to care. And while she's busy defending her independence, she doesn't notice what she's slowly losing. Because while women were taught to fight for freedom, the world was quietly taking something else from them, their peace. Love wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't a contract or a contest or a currency. It was two people standing side by side, facing the world together. Not perfectly balanced, not flawlessly equal, but harmoniously aligned. Each needed the other, and that need wasn't shameful. It was sacred. But as the narrative of division deepened, that harmony began to decay. Love stopped being about unity and started being about leverage. Relationships turned into silent negotiations. Who gives more? Who sacrifices less? Who holds the upper hand? And when love turns into accounting, trust dies first. Today, you can feel the loss everywhere. Walk into any cafe and you'll see couples sitting together, eyes glued to glowing screens instead of each other. Scroll through social media and you'll see relationship coaches preaching that love should serve your personal growth, not your partnership. Every argument becomes a test of power. Every act of kindness becomes strategy. The language of intimacy has been replaced with self-help jargon. We talk about boundaries, energies, and alignment, but no one talks about devotion anymore. We've rebranded self-protection as self-love, forgetting that love and protection are not the same thing. The world told women, don't depend on men, and told men, don't trust women. Both listened, and both stopped trying. The result isn't freedom, it's detachment. Love now resembles a cold war, smiles on the surface, suspicion underneath. Couples don't build homes, they build walls. And when two people are more focused on defending their autonomy than nurturing connection, intimacy becomes impossible. Because love can't survive where everyone is afraid to lose control. The psychological fallout is enormous. Women, taught that needing someone equals weakness, armor themselves with performance. Men, taught that showing emotion equals weakness, bury their hearts beneath silence. And so we meet each other's fears instead of each other's souls. The masculine feels unwanted unless he performs. The feminine feels unsafe unless she dominates. Both ache for something real, but neither knows how to return to it. Erich Fromm once wrote, "Immature love says, I love you because I need you. Mature love says, I need you because I love you." But in today's culture, both forms have been pathologized. Need itself has become taboo. Look closer, and you'll see that the death of partnership is the death of trust. When love becomes conditional, every embrace feels like a transaction. The bed that once held intimacy now holds distance. The home that once echoed with laughter now echoes with scrolling and silence. We've mistaken independence for strength, and in doing so, we've made loneliness fashionable. What was once romantic is now labeled codependent. What was once loyalty is now settling. The modern couple is taught to protect their ego at the expense of their connection, and then to call the emptiness that follows empowerment. But love doesn't survive in equilibrium. It survives in surrender, in the willingness to risk being hurt, misunderstood, or rejected, in the courage to give without calculating the return. The ancient Greeks called this agape, love as self-giving, not self-preserving. It's the only kind that builds legacies, families, civilizations. But our culture has traded it for temporary pleasures and emotional safety nets. We've been trained to believe that vulnerability is danger and that distance is dignity. And in that confusion, the heartbeat of humanity has gone faint. Women who once radiated warmth now radiate defense. Their smiles don't reach their eyes. Their laughter sounds rehearsed. Behind the posture of confidence is fatigue, the exhaustion of endless proving. And deep down, many of them feel what they can't admit, that rejecting the masculine has also meant rejecting part of themselves. Because masculinity and femininity were never meant to be enemies. They were mirrors, each giving meaning to the other. When one is erased, the other becomes distorted. Now, the modern woman looks into that broken mirror and sees conflict staring back. The traits that once made her magnetic, empathy, trust, tenderness, now feel foreign, outdated, even shameful. She's been taught to trade them for armor and applause. But every mask weighs something. Every time she puts on confidence in the morning, she feels the quiet ache underneath it. Every night she wipes it off, seeing the fatigue she can't post about. The mirror doesn't lie. It reflects the cost of pretending. And somewhere deep inside, she knows the question that no slogan can silence. If this is what strength looks like, why does it feel so heavy? But while she's fighting that war within herself, something else is happening quietly on the other side. Something she doesn't see yet. A silence. A withdrawal. A vanishing act that will change everything. Protest. They didn't form movements or draft manifestos. They just went quiet. The withdrawal of men didn't happen in riots or revolutions. It unfolded like the tide, receding so slowly that by the time anyone noticed, the shoreline was bare. At first, it looked like indifference, but it wasn't. It was defense. It was exhaustion disguised as calm. For years, men tried to adapt. They became gentler, more expressive, more emotionally aware, hoping that by softening, they might be seen as safe. But instead of acceptance, they found suspicion. When they led, they were called controlling. When they followed, they were called weak. When they succeeded, it was expected. When they failed, it was shameful. No matter what direction they turned, they were told they were the problem. And so they learned the one lesson society never prepared for: silence. Now you see it everywhere. The quiet man who no longer argues, no longer explains, no longer chases. He works, he lifts, he creates. He stays silent because silence is the only place left where he isn't told he's wrong. Some call it apathy, but it isn't. It's self-preservation. When every attempt at connection becomes a crime, withdrawal becomes survival. And that withdrawal has changed the emotional temperature of the entire world. The laughter feels thinner. The home feels colder. Even the air between people feels heavier. Because when men stop caring, the world loses direction. Women feel that absence too, though they rarely name it. They say things like, "Men don't try anymore," or "There are no good men left." But what they're really feeling is the vacuum left behind when masculine presence, steady, grounding, protective, disappears. That energy used to give the feminine something to lean against, not because she was weak, but because balance requires counterweight. Without it, the modern world feels like a ship without an anchor, drifting, uncertain, quietly afraid. This silence isn't revenge, it's revelation. Men finally saw what the world truly thought of them and stepped back. The tragedy is that the retreat of men didn't liberate women. It left both sides stranded. The very independence the culture celebrated has become a quiet prison. Women miss what they were told to hate, and men grieve what they were taught to suppress. Both suffer under the same lie, that we are better apart. And yet, the truth always waits. Every ideology, no matter how powerful, eventually collapses under its own weight. The slogans are losing their echo. The hashtags are fading. The outrage no longer feels noble. You can sense it in the fatigue of social media arguments, in the loneliness of modern dating, in the quiet voice inside both men and women whispering, "Something's gone wrong." The world is starting to sober up. Because hatred has an expiration date. You can't build identity on opposition forever. You can't teach someone to despise half of humanity without poisoning the other half. And after decades of noise, people are beginning to feel the silence inside, the emptiness that comes from living in conflict with their own nature. Women are realizing that empowerment without connection isn't power, it's burnout. Men are realizing that peace without love isn't freedom, it's exile. But beneath the ashes of division, something ancient is stirring, a recognition. The quiet understanding that men and women were never designed to compete, they were designed to complement. Masculinity isn't toxic, it's protective. Femininity isn't weak, it's restorative. Together, they form a balance that no ideology can replicate. It's the same force that built families, civilizations, and meaning itself. It's the gravity that keeps the human story from flying apart. The reckoning isn't about blame, it's about remembering. It's the slow awakening from a collective hypnosis. The moment when men and women look across the divide and finally see each other again, not as rivals, not as replacements, but as reflections. The day when the war between genders ends, not with surrender, but with understanding. Because you can't rewrite biology. You can't delete the need for love. You can only forget it for a while. And that forgetting is ending. The world is tired of performing strength, tired of pretending not to care. Beneath all the pride and pain, something simple endures. The truth that completion was never about perfection. It was about partnership, the kind that doesn't need hashtags or permission to exist. Maybe one day, when the noise finally dies down and the pride fades, men and women will stand across from each other again, not armed, not afraid, and whisper the only apology that ever mattered: "I forgot you weren't my enemy."